and that subject individuals to pressures from markets, finance, advertising, and intense social competition. These observations don't exempt us from studying the most classical social questions. Instead, they oblige us to make a twofold effort. On the one hand, we have to ask what the social inequalities and injustices are today, compared with what they might have been in the recent past. For example, yesterday, at least in a certain number of countries, the social question was dominated by the theme of exploitation at the workplace, the existence of relations of domination which, for industrial societies, were played out in the first instance in the factory or the workshop. Today, if I can put it like that, for countless human beings, the principal social drama is not being exploited. It is unemployment, exclusion, vulnerability, and anything which bears the mark of a lack of social relations. As a result, poverty has once again become established as a credible concern, a sort of posthumous reversal of situation or revenge or of Proudhon over Marx. Behind these situations, we rapidly find individuals who have lost their bearings, whose subjectivity does not succeed in finding an outlet in action, and to whom society, or rather globalization, sends a message which is intolerable. Consume, gain access to the fruits of modernity, and be yourself, be autonomous. Thus, I think, for instance, that one of the sources of contemporary Islamism, in its radical violence, as in some of the aspects of the Quietism, of the Tabligh, or the Neo-Salafist nebula, resides precisely in this message of individualism directed at populations who receive it and experience it in the realms of modernity, but who don't have the means to fully access it. On the other hand, the observation that there is a rise in individualism is an encouragement to the study of the process of subjectivation and desubjectivation by means of which individuals are constructed and crushed today. These processes are related to the social question. In particular, contrary to the utopia of the 90s, which forecast the end of labor, we have a better understanding today of the meaning of work from the point of view of the individual for whom it is both liberation and suffering, creation and deprivation. And thus we rediscover the ideas which were central to the thinking of one of my predecessors in the role of president of the ISA, George Friedman. Above all, these processes are not only social in the classical sense of the adjective, they are also cultural and religious. The rise of individualism means that more than ever, culture is the outcome in movement of all sorts of individual choices, each of which can become involved with or extricated from what we refer to as identities, which is not such a good word. In the past, culture seemed to reproduce itself. Each individual more or less took on the identity dictated by the family, the community, or the nation. Today, we know that identities are much more produced or invented, in the words of Eric Hobsbawm and Terence Ranger. This approach is also valid for religion. All I would say here is that a major problem for us today is how to allow for what belongs to religion and what belongs to culture, a question which was central in the last Clifford Geertz text. Sociology is on the move because it is continuing to study themes which are classical to it, but have been fundamentally rethought to the point that it is led to ask questions which would have been iconoclastic yesterday. I have just chaired recently a European panel which was examining candidatures for large research grants, and among the themes taken up, I can, for example, mention two which should have been unthinkable 20 years ago. One of the award winners questions whether redistribution is not a factor of tension and violence. Another question, whether or not it can be demonstrated that democracy is a source of economic or social progress. Today, sociology is opening up new research fields in themes and objects which are newer to it. Sociology is interested in the social, in the classical meaning of this word, but also, as I said, increasingly in the cultural, and is rediscovering one of its founding concerns, which 20 or 30 years ago it was tending to neglect: religion. We have ceased to think that reason and the inheritance of the Enlightenment should, of necessity, shape a modernity characterized by the decline of religion. Similarly, sociology considers violence and war in new terms, far from those which dominated at the time of the Cold War, whether it be a question of domestic violence, to which in particular women and children are subjected, or that of terrorism and political, with their infra-political and meta-political forms, bringing the former closer to organized crime and the latter to radicalized religion. Sociology is on the move also if we consider its relation to other fields of knowledge. I've just been speaking about culture and history. There are considerable changes taking place there. Thus, in the past, sociology tended to study society, the social problems, relations, facts, and left to ethnology or social anthropology the task of studying culture, far away, in countries distant from the West, or else at home, in the survivals inherited from the past, that is to say, folklore. Today, the boundaries between disciplines are blurred. The most exotic forms of otherness are to be found everywhere in the West. The concert we had just before is a very good example of this. And modernity is also everywhere. The divisions shaped by colonialism have given way to post-colonialism and beyond, and the social anthropological's favorite method, participant observation, is also a very common practice for us, sociologists. Yesterday, societies were in history. Today, many of us are fascinated by the role of memory and by the actors who claim to be part of history. Memory and history are part of social life. Similarly, we are led to consider our relations with philosophy, and more particularly with political philosophy, quite simply because we are increasingly being requested to describe the world as it is, but also to deduce from our analysis proposals concerning what seems to us to be just, good, or desirable. This can be seen, for example, in relation to questions of ethics. Yesterday, ethics were superimposed on collective life, dictating its values from above. Today, what we refer to as ethics is increasingly a point of view about a particular problem, each case being considered individually. And sociologists are mobilized to define this point of view, as well as specialists from other fields of knowledge. For example, in the context of the committees for clinical ethics that are located in hospitals, where their opinion sheds light on sensitive decisions of life and death. This leads me to observe that increasingly our relations with other disciplines bring us into contact with scientists from what are known sometimes as the hard sciences. This is obvious as soon as it is a question of the climate or the environment or the so-called natural catastrophes, and which are usually only natural to a certain extent. Yes, again, we see this in relation to water, as was demonstrated a few minutes ago, or food, which constitute major issues at stake, for which scientists from all fields mobilize within NGOs, for example. They may include sociologists. This is why I have invited a Nobel Prize for Chemistry, Professor Lee, who is also the elected president of XVII, to open tomorrow morning our discussions. This is a way of indicating our openness to disciplines which at first sight are very far from ours. The example which I have just given of committees for clinical ethics, in which doctors and the nursing personnel also participate, enables me to illustrate an important point. We also work with professionals from other fields, with whom we co-produce knowledge. Of course, this is not new. As from its beginnings, sociology has worked together with social workers, doctors, the legal profession in this way in several countries, if only to alert public opinion to major problems such as poverty, racism, the lack of hygiene. But it seems to me that today something new is occurring in this sphere. Since I am approaching my conclusion, I would now like to look towards the future, but by examining 2 points which I consider important. The first one is that of our relevance. Sociology is meant to be scientific and rigorous, which forces us to consider demonstrations appropriate for us. Where are the proofs in our subject? We cannot really carry out experiments, as in the majority of the exact sciences, and we are increasingly subject to evaluations which judge our research studies, our academic journals, and our institutions along lines which are too often akin to those which Sorokin referred to in the 40s as quantophrenia. Over and above the opinions which we all have of one another, and the caution we exercise when considering quantified evaluations, which do risk subjecting us to norms which rapidly become bureaucratic or to demands of short-time economic viability, how can we maintain that our findings are scientific? I think that the relevance of our research is increasingly to be found in what others, rather than ourselves, say about us, and not only because they are evaluating us. Our relevance lies, for instance, in what the actors in our research studies say and do, whether they be in the political, social, economic, or cultural sphere. This does not imply the least submission on our part. This does not oblige us to work on behalf of one or other of these actors, but rather to accept having our work discussed in the public sphere and not only in our own scientific community. Of course, not all of us necessarily share this point of view. In any case, it seems to me that in the future, we will be increasingly led to discuss this issue, which is inseparable from a second issue, that of our participation in public life. Some of us, with convincing arguments, wish to remain professionals who, as such, only have discussions within the academic community. Others behave as experts who put their knowledge at the disposal of an opposing power, or the media. Why not? Others think it is possible to revive the old figure of the committed intellectual, to have a direct influence on public discussions and in particular on political life, a stand which in history had too frequently led to illusions, if not to the misdeeds which ideologists and other organic intellectuals gave their support to. Personally, I am convinced that our contribution can be useful over and above academic life alone on condition that we adopt an approach in which the production of knowledge and the testing of its relevance are articulated in a single process. We can speak here of the sociological intervention, of deliberative sociology, of action research, of clinical sociology, all approaches which obviously deserve to be discussed. The fact remains that the discussion there also is open and that the question of commitment deserves, in my opinion, to be articulated with that of the relevance of our research. But in the world of tomorrow, will we still be sociologists? Will it still be necessary to talk about sociology? I have already said that the very object which defines us, society, is challenged, including by some important sociologists. I have also observed that many research studies presented are pluridisciplinary, and that the distances between classical disciplines, for example, social anthropology and sociology, often seem to be blurred, without mentioning the recent emergence of transdisciplinary fields like cultural study. Would it not be better in the future to speak of social science in the singular, which is much more the tendency with the Anglo-Saxon, or in the plural, which is much more the tendency in my country? And shouldn't we accept the idea of our being diluted in an entity of this type, social science? This idea is not new. It can also be reversed, with sociology becoming the social science par excellence, making it appear as a kind of hegemony. This sort of idea comes up against many obstacles, very real and important obstacles, beginning with those which are institutional in nature and are linked, for example, to the organization of universities' teachings or the careers of researchers, lecturers. It also incurs the risk of distancing us from our intellectual inheritance, to which we have good reasons to be attached, no matter what our personal orientations may be. It therefore had disadvantages as well as advantages. And I am not going to end my term of office by making it my main concern, not at all. Also, I don't intend to promote this idea. I just wanted to mention it merely because it has the advantage of encouraging us to ask important questions and perhaps to advance in what seems to me the most important thing today for sociologists, an improvement in our capacity to generalize in our research studies and to have discussions at this general level, which is sometimes referred to as theoretical, which is not a precise good word. While maintaining, if we try to generalize, we must also maintain a fundamental requirement, which is to produce knowledge on the basis of the exploration of material realities. I thank you for your attention.
This is the end of the opening ceremony, and now you are invited to the reception outside. Thank you very much.